Welcome back to Track Talk. We're going to be doing week 3 of the 1838 League. Only 2 games this week, so hopefully we'll keep this video pretty short and sweet. We're going to jump into game B, and just starting off in the auction here. The auction is kind of interesting because we see the M and H go for a ton of money. I think it goes up to like 190. Um, and here we go. It looks like it went for 180. The consequence of this, of course, is that the winner of the M&H, Too Many Revenants, is unable to price enforce the C&A, and consequently the C&A goes for just 195. So not great, this price differential between the two privates, something to be avoided in the future probably. This leaves DAC to take the B&O, and we see that occur. So we are into stock round 1. Two interesting things to note in stock round 1. First is that Crewmeister with a CNA player got the CNA so cheap he was able to float a company even without the PRR share. So usually you're relegated to the PRR if you get this private, but he has his pick of the litter. And then the other thing that's interesting, we'll see in just a second. CNO floats, no surprises there. Too Many Revenants chooses to float the NYC. Okay, that's fine. But then you see that Crewmeister follows this up with the NYH float. So this is dangerous, right? Because the NYH floats, same stock round or even a stock round later, it has the ability to kill the NYC's runs for a very long time. So floating the NYC here is dangerous. If Too Many Revenants wanted the NYC, maybe should have passed, waited for the other players to declare themselves, and then gone back for the NYC if the NYH was not chosen. But we will see this come back to bite him in the future. DAC, interestingly, because the PRR was not floated, also is going to be able to float. So we'll have a 4-company float, which is not very common at 1830, but always cool to see. So all these players will just be floating their companies, and we will go into operating round 1. We have a pretty standard track from CNO, NYC, optimistic here, trying to get into New York tile, but of course is blocked immediately by the NYNH, very predictable. NYNH buys 2-2 trains, not clear what the strategy is there. Does make it potentially possible for DAC to buy in privates, but of course DAC is the B&O player, so not too worried about that. PRR, also standard track, buys a single 2 train, and we're into stock round 2. Stock round 2 is boring, we're just going to skip it, and we go into operating round 2, and we'll see pretty standard track again. CNO is able to link up with Chicago. The real question here is who's going to get their private in first, and it ends up being that NYC realizes it needs green to lay any track at all, so it's going to buy into the 3s and open up privates for the other players. He buys in his private. He paid, I think, 180 for it, so only $40 of profit, which is not as good as you would hope. NY and H, he is now in green, so able to buy in his expensive private, immediately upgrades New York for a little bit more money, but again, only able to run one of those 2 trains, so not entirely clear what the rationale behind that second purchase is. We are then onto the PRR. PRR heads to Lancaster, drops the token, and will also buy a 3 train. NY and H, by the way, forgot to buy a 3 train, so that's going to be a problem for him in a little bit. We are into stock round 3. So big story in stock round 3 is that we're going to have a little bit of a fight for the B&O. We will see that in a moment. And then the other thing is that Too Many Revenants is going to spend a lot of time just kind of buying and selling shares here, not accomplishing a whole lot. So we see now Crewmeister is pressuring DAC for the B&O, but DAC has plenty of liquidity to defend this if he wants. It would leave the PRR vulnerable, so he needs to be a little bit cognizant of the fact that by defending the B&O, he could lose the PRR, but that doesn't end up happening, so he gets a little bit of a break there. Too Many Revenants buying shares and selling them, as alluded to earlier. Crewmeister continuing to press for the B&O. And I'm going to move through this quickly. We do see a split presidency of the B&O. DAC sells out of the PRR and is able to defend. Crewmeister still pressing. DAC is now bare presidency of the PRR and gets up to the safe 50%. So now Crewmeister is going to sell out of the B&O and reinvest his cash. And the rest of the stock round is going to be Crewmeister floating the B&M. B&M has good synergy with his NY&H since he laid track to the east in Providence. So not unreasonable to take this company, especially when you've lost out on the B&O, but probably not, obviously not his first choice since he went for the B&O first. Rest of the stock round is him just floating his company, and then Too Many Revenants eventually locks up a bunch of cash in Erie, which he has no hope of floating. So that's probably not the greatest. Rest of the stock round we can just buzz through. So we're now into operating round 3. In operating round 3, we're going to have a little bit of deja vu. HJM Quilter is going to immediately teleport over to Scranton. I feel like we've seen her do this last week and maybe even the first week. There's just a lot of players taking advantage of this. And I a little bit rolled my eyes when I first saw it, but, I don't hate it. She's guaranteed to get into Reading and Allenton and New York again, so probably the right move. Regardless, that's what she decides to do. And she is able to snag a 3. So we are in a situation where we're probably going to be seeing the fours come out here very soon. Beano's first operation heads over to the east. Love it. Buys the 3. Does not buy the 4, interestingly. PRR upgrades Philadelphia. Is one of the first times in this league I think we've seen someone not block themselves. So does have a valid upgrade into New York here. And then he picks up the 4. So we were talking about the NYNH neglecting to buy a 3. Does end up falling back trainless. However, fortunately for Crewmeister, he was able to operate the B&M first, shuffle a little bit of money into the NYNH before those trains rusted. So it did get some utility out of them, even though they're not running. NYNH heading down to Reading and Allentown, but not going to beat the CNO there. Falls back, has to buy a 4. NYC still has not run a single route. Going to upgrade his home and falls back again into the next operating round. And basically, we're just going to see the CNO player get into New York. Great news for them. And the rest of the track is basically standard. So we are going to skip into the stock round. And as we look at this stock round, we see that there are 2 companies in brown. One of them is vulnerable to a takeover. The NYC obviously has terrible track, doesn't have a ton of cash, but a presidency is a presidency. You might want to consider it if you can think about getting a run for it next operating round. At least reasonable to pick up a cheap single share. It's already $30, so the most you're going to lose is $20. I don't know that you necessarily need to steal the presidency, but consider picking up those cheap shares. NYNH, similar story. Buy 1 share and just hold it for the rest of the game. And we'll see if anybody wants to do that. DAC, he does pick up an NYNH. He is technically vulnerable, actually not as it stands vulnerable to a dump, but needs to be a little bit careful to watch out for that. Not that the NYNH is an attractive dump target this operating stock round, but if he doesn't have priority into the next stock round and maintains this position, could be in trouble if someone else buys a share. And actually, he buys up 4 shares of this, so now he's really in a dangerous position for the next stock round. HDM Quilter, she goes back and I believe floats the CPR. So again, a little bit of deja vu. I think we've seen her suitcase the CPR and teleport the CNO in at least one other game. It's going to be a similar strategy here. The rest of the stock round is pretty unremarkable. CPR floats. Erie does not. So we will go into the operating round here. See the suitcase set up for HJM. HJM is going to buy a train so that she can start shuffling cash around, but we'll try to avoid running this company otherwise. Buys the 4. Now we're into her other company, the CNO. CNO is probably going to be buying a 4 cross and has decent track with a New York run and a Chicago run. B&M and NYNH are kind of cash poor. He did a lot of withholding in the last operating round, which is why the NYNH was in brown. So he's still, looking for ways to afford permanent trains here. He does withhold again. And we'll move through this pretty quickly, but basically, NYNH Crewmeister is able to shuffle trains around enough with some withholds that he is actually able to break into the 5s earlier than we might expect, which happens shortly here in the second set of this operating round. So we see that B&M is trainless with $800, buys the 4, buys the 5, and we are into brown. This is nice for him because his other company, the NYNH, is now able to immediately run 2 trains out of a brown New York. So pretty good timing for him, but it was very costly in terms of multiple withholds, losing runs on trains by shuffling, that kind of thing. So aggressive play from him, but he does get a fat payout at the end to benefit him. Action in stock round 5 now. Too Many Revenants is still sitting on that Erie presidency. He hasn't been able to float, so we will see him start selling out and working on floating that. Very costly selling paying shares to float a company with pretty poor track potential, but I understand why he's doing it. If you look at the train roster, he's sitting on double fives. And if you look at the market, very unlikely that the Erie is going to be trashed down to 76 to operate behind these companies. And he's almost well, very likely to get double fives, which is going to save his NYC, which is broke in a train liability. So he's kind of forced to do this. Very understandable. Crewmeister, he's going to make a big move here. He dumps out of the NYNH, which, it's always satisfying to dump, but you got to think about the train rush here. You've just given Elite Junior a bunch of cheap shares that he could buy right away if he wants. And this company has a 4 train. So who's going to be rusting the 4 trains? Nobody anytime soon. We just said Erie double 5, 6 train in the C&O, 6 train in the B&O, and then there's no cash in any of these other companies to rust the 4. So basically, Crewmeister has given Elite Junior a company for free, a bunch of map control, even a token, with no imminent train liability. Not the best. So if I'm in this position as DAC, I would immediately buy up these NYNH shares, just secure them. Again, only $20, and worst case scenario, they drop down to 10. That's $10 lost, no big deal. The only downside to that is that you potentially lock up some liquidity. But you definitely don't want to just sit on 4 with 5 shares in the market, because you can't guarantee you're going to have priority. There's a chance you could end up in brown and then lose control of this company. So he needs to buy at least 1 share. Probably should just buy all 5 right here. He disagrees, though, and is going to continue to sit on just 4 shares for the majority of this stock round and allow other players to nibble away at these brown market shares. Erie's continuing to float. Other players are buying paying shares. We do eventually see some of these brown shares get bought, but it takes a long time, much longer than it should. So we'll just continue zipping through this stock round. Not a whole lot to say. Mostly just buying paying shares and the Erie floating. Look how many actions have gone by, and still not a single share has been bought in the NYNH. That's pretty crazy to me. We do finally see a single share, and of all people, it's Too Many Revenants, the player that's floating the Erie. I think this kind of inspires other people to start investing, and we do see another couple shares come off the market here. Long stock round, and we are into operating round 5. This means that the Erie was not trashed and is guaranteed to get 2 5s here, which he immediately snaps up. So that's a pretty big deal for Too Many Revenants, who otherwise was going to be in deep trouble in this train rush. This does mean that the C&O is immediately able to buy a 6 train if they want it. So C&O is going to drop a quick token in NY. Not at the end of the world. B&M still can tap NY, and it doesn't really affect their run that much. But could potentially be a problem for New York eventually. If they get the brown upgrade here and wanted to run into Boston through New York, they're not going to be able to do it. Regardless, quick withhold here, and we see the first 6. This is unfortunate for the B&O player who just had their 3 train rust and falls back, but they're still able to afford a 6 of their own. They get the Philadelphia upgrade, so both PRR and B&O are happy with this situation. This Philadelphia token, potentially important, as there's 3 companies that can run through this track right now. You token that, and you're going to be making at least one of those companies unhappy. So both 6s are bought, but again, we were talking about the D train earlier. Look at the company cash. Nobody has any cash to buy a D. So even though DAC is potentially in train trouble here with 2 4 trains, someone's got to pressure him. And he's got 3 presidencies. It's going to be pretty easy for him to withhold to get a D train upgrade if he wants. The NYC, in theory, could out-of-pocket a D, but look at his liquidity and net worth. That would just bankrupt him, so he's going to have to shuffle. So the only person that could potentially, bring out a D would be this player here, and they can't do it. So that NYNH dump is questionable. DAK's PRR is now running, and has a pretty good run and is going to start withholding, which is very reasonable, right? Only 30% of the presidency needs 2D trains. And the basically name of the rest of the operating round is going to be DAK massively withholding to afford trains. B&M, pretty good runs for his 4 and 5. Is able to double tap Boston and get a run into New York, so 280, decent. CPR is going to start building themselves a little fort up here, and we'll see how that works out for him. NYC going to be shuffling a train out of the Erie. DAK, another company with just a 4 train, highly likely to be withholding. We are into the second of 3 operating rounds, and I think that we can pretty safely just skip this one and just remark that DAK is going to continue to massively withhold. And I think that if you look at the company sheet here, you can see that he's going to have no trouble affording a D. Of course, he needs 2 of them, but with more withholds in this operating round, shouldn't have any trouble. And because of his share lead, even with all these withholds, his net worth is still very close to the other players. So he's in a very strong position and shouldn't be too worried. We will see even more withholding. And again, the PRR ends up with $800, but he actually neglects to get the D train upgrade. And what you'll notice is that HDM Quilter is running for a ton of money, 450, has almost $500. They're also in contention for the D train upgrade. So missing it here is potentially costly because if you don't get the D train upgrade, you're losing a run when your train rusts. And then you're also paying $300 more than you otherwise would be. Plus, you still got to buy that other D train. So I don't know. You may not want to rust your own 4 train. I understand that. And then go into the stock round with very little cash when you're forced to buy. But why not get the upgrade, secure it, and then shuffle trains so you still have cash into the stock round, and then buy the second D train late in OR 6.1 or 6.2. I don't know. I think there's a missed opportunity there. SR6 isn't all that interesting. Basically, everyone's just buying paying shares, but they're a little bit afraid of leaving themselves open to a dump from DAC, and as a result, DAC is able to just widen his share lead. He's up by 5 shares on the other 2 players, 2 shares, 2 shares on HGM Quilter. By the end of the stock round, he has a pretty monstrous share lead. He is going to be up to 23 shares. So, looking at this, he's in a very strong position. We've already said that. Easy D train in the PRR, halfway there on the NYNH, and he's got a 9-share lead on 2 of the players. 7 shares on HGM Quilter, and HGM Quilter has a suitcase, which is a potential liability. One of these shares is kind of artificial because it's never going to be paying until the suitcase is broken. So even though he's a little bit behind in net worth and has train liability, still a commanding position. And this is just the benefit of having multiple presidencies, right? Is that people aren't really safe to invest in those companies because you can shuffle trains and dump at any point. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect, of course, is that you have all the map control. So you can protect your runs. He's going to be running 2 D trains, and by locking down tokens and having the track to protect his runs, he's going to have good runs with both of those trains. Now, after singing DAK praises, we will see him pay the piper for missing out on that D train upgrade, and HJM Quilter is actually going to snipe it from him. It looks like she doesn't do it just yet, but she'll do it in the next operating round, I believe, which is going to cost him a little bit. So we see that DAK is going to continue to get some withholds, which is nice for him, but he does eventually miss out on the another withhold. He does miss out on the upgrade, which is kind of crazy. And I think here's where we see the D-Train upgrade from HDM Quilter. She withholds and snags it. I think she could have done that last operating round, which would have been more damaging for DAK, so I'm not sure entirely why she waited. I didn't do the math. Maybe she was a little bit off on her run or something, but would have liked to seen that a little bit earlier. So now DAK is going to have to pay the piper and afford these D-Trains, but you look at his companies, $1,000 in the PRR and $800 in the B&O. Should be no trouble. B&O, he buys the D. He contributes 300. PRR, another little contribution here, and he now has all the trains he needs. We are seeing the players collude to break the CPR suitcase, even though she was able to lay a pretty convincing block here because she laid a straight dit here instead of the gentle curve. She is unfortunately going to have her suitcase blocked. Or sorry, not the gentle curve, the sharp curve. Last operating round, we're just going to start seeing DAK's massive runs. I will point out that he could be tokened out here in Pittsburgh, but the only person with a token that relatively is close to Pittsburgh is the NYC, and the NYC is only one track point to compete against 3 track points, so it's never going to get over there. We see more track development. Pittsburgh is tokened by Erie, but you need 2 tokens, of course, to have any effect, so that's a wasted token. B&M, he was killed a while ago by that C&O token. C&O, D train and a 6, going to have decent runs, but one of these trains is going to have to go over to the CPR shortly, so this is short-lived. 620, that's pretty nice. B&O, first run of the D train, and he runs for 430. So this is how you come back from having to buy all these D trains. And these runs are only getting better, right? Because he's going to be linking up with all these 00 cities in just another operating round here. PRR, another D train. He's able to complete that link into the loop, the 00s. So he's running for 450, even better than the B&O. We look at stock round 7. Let's look at the spreadsheet here. And of course, DAK had some negatives here, especially when he had to buy his permanent trains. But already in OR3, 6.3, he's running more than anyone else. Closest competitor is HAM Quilter. She's only $400 ahead of him, and he is running for over $200 in each operating round more than her. He's also going to have a bigger stock jump in the stock round when everything floats up because he's got a ton more shares than her. So at the beginning of stock round 7, it seems pretty clear that DAK is going to win, so we can just call it here. And DAK does win it. It's not a huge margin of victory, $300, $400, but pretty convincing win. And I think this just comes back down to other players being unable to force the train rush. He was dumped with a company with a 4 train, and he got way too many withholds on that, so it really didn't hurt him. And then he just built up a massive share lead, so he was able to win that on share density. That brings us to the final game of the week, Game C. The auction here is not too interesting. We do see a pass on the B&O from Riverfiend, so everybody gets 1 payout, but otherwise the auction proceeds pretty much as you'd expect. In this game, we'll just see a 2-company float. It's going to be the NYC again, which again can be risky if you don't know when the NYNH is floating. So the PRR player got the PRR stolen, so wasn't able to float that, went for the C&O instead, and he's going to be able to sell the PRR share next stock round to float the C&O, and then the B&O player is also going to have enough money to float. So A. Murphy is not safe on the NYC, even though the NYNH is not going to float here, even in next stock round, still needs to be worried about that. Rest of the stock round's unremarkable. Everybody just floats their companies, and we see the 2 companies float. PRR lays pretty standard track, buys a train. NYC heading over to the New York tile, also buys a 2 train, and here's where it starts to go off the rail. Riverfiend, with the payout of the B&O, is able to go back and immediately snags the NYNH. So if you're A. Murphy, you're quaking in your boats here, begging and pleading for the NYNH to play friendly, but spoiler alert, that's not going to be happening. Rest of the stock round, nothing really happens, just see the NYNH float. Actually, we see the C&O float as well. Sorry about that. So we are now into OR2, and we have 4 companies, 2 of them new. The 2 new companies are going to be operating, of course, before the old companies. So the old companies have a better chance of buying in their privates, and we'll see if they're able to make that work. NYNH kills the NYC. We saw this last game. Funny how much overlap there is between these different games. He buys a 2, 3 of those left, buys 2 2s. C&O heading over to Chicago and is going to buy into the 3s and buys in the CNA, so he's in a good position. PRR heads over to Lancaster, tokens it, buys the 3, and buys in a cheap private, more expensive private, NYC, ruing that he decided to float this company and starts heading over to Rochester, but it'll take him a while to get there. He buys the 3 and buys in some privates as well. We're into stock round 3. Evaluating the companies in stock round 3, we got a B&O that's got a huge treasury, and it's going to be very hard for River Fiend to defend. If you're devouring Trey, I think you got to be looking at the B&O, especially since you're the PRR president and you can lay friendly track, have great runs for both of your companies. That would be my first choice. And then the other company that is up that could be attractive is the B&M, and that's because the NYNH has played friendly with the B&M. This is, I think, strictly a worse company. It just has less potential. Generally, it's going to be tokened out at NYNH or NYC. I mean, that happens frequently. Even if he gets the token in NYC, hard to develop good track with just the 2 tokens. So I don't know. I would be taking the B&O, but Devouring Trade disagrees, and he's going to be taking the B&M. So again, I mean, you think about it, $670 treasury versus $1,000 treasury, and the cost to float either of those companies is functionally the same. $402 for the B&M, $400 for the B&O. Seems like it's basically free money to float the B&O and a better company. King Zombie sees the rationale that I've just outlined, and he's going to be taking the B&O. Good move. And A. Murphy, he is buying Payne shares. River Fiend doesn't have a whole lot of cash and doesn't have much to do. So we're basically just going to see these 2 companies float. And King Zombie has now stolen the presidency. River Fiend didn't make any attempt to defend. And we see the two new companies float. Should be heading into the next operating round here. B&O's first up. He's going to shuffle some money out of the company by buying a 2, but does not buy into any, is not able to buy into the 4s, so just buys a single 3. We see the B&M push into the 4s here, so none of the 2 trains get to run. Bad news for the other players. PRR, he's going to upgrade Lancaster and try and get into Reading and Allentown. Could have also headed over to Philadelphia and Trenton. Probably would have had a little bit of a more lucrative run by doing that. Runs for, is just buying a train out of the B&M. So he's going to have 2 trains in the PRR, which should have pretty good track in the next operating round. NYNH falling back trainless because he didn't secure a 3 train. Upgrades his home, buys the 4. C&O is able to link up with the Chicago tile and also is not going to fall back because he was able to buy a 3. He's paying that out. NYC gets into Rochester and finally has a run, but again, we're seeing the danger of that NYC float here. B&O just doing his thing, upgrading his home. PRR is going to lay the number 2 track. This game has accelerated fast enough that the C&O player didn't have the opportunity to lay that. This does open up the possibility of runs into New York North and into New York South from Lancaster, so always potentially dangerous. This is also pretty good news for the NYNH player, who is going to be very easily able to snag a Lancaster token, so that's pretty good potential runs for the NYNH throughout the game. Bad news for the B&O, I would say. PRR paying for just 80. C&O, he does eventually lay the Acron tile, but one position in operating order too late in order to block that number 2 track lay. B&M, he's going to do the NYNH a big favor, lay the Providence, and he actually tokens it. He only has a single train, so he's going to token this for a $10 benefit of running into New York as opposed to Boston. That's probably not the move. We were talking about how the B&M, oftentimes gets tokened out of New York, and here he is basically just guaranteed it by throwing away his token. So I think that's probably not the move. Pays out for 90, shuffling trains still. NYC, heading over to Erie. I guess he's hoping to get an Erie float, but he's really not got the best revenue and has had a very slow start to this game. NYNH links up with Lancaster, immediately drops the token. Definitely the right move there. And pays out for 110. We're into stock round 4. Only thing of note in this stock round is A. Murphy is going to be going for the Erie float. And really is going to be struggling to float it. Is going to have to sell out heavily to do it. And I think if you do the math, actually you really can't do it without selling out of the NYC very heavily. But he has a friend in King Zombie who is going to help him float it. So we will see everybody basically buying shares. A. Murphy is doing a little bit of cross investing, working on floating the Erie, and gets kind of stuck at 5 shares here, but then gets a little love from King Zombie and is able to go back and float it. And we are into the next operating round. The Erie float works out pretty well for both of those players. A. Murphy lays his track and then buys the 4 and the 5, which then allows King Zombie to buy the second 5. So he's probably pretty happy that he was cooperating with A. Murphy there, since it led him a permanent train. PRR upgrades Philadelphia and is set up for a double run into New York as long as they can get this Philadelphia upgrade. So NYNH or the PRR really needs to make sure that this gets upgraded so that they can run it to New York South. If they don't do it here, looking at the NYNH, the B&O is also able to run it to New York South and is going to be, I'm sure, salivating for that opportunity. It's pretty unusual that the Philadelphia track was just upgraded here in operating round 4. Usually that happens at a much earlier opportunity. We'll keep moving through the operating round here. C&O is just heading east, but already tokened at Lancaster, not a whole lot of opportunity over there. New York gets upgraded, but unfortunately for the B&M player, they threw away a token on Providence, so really not going to be able to secure any larger runs for himself. New York just upgrading his home, does finally get to run 3 stops, but unable to afford a 5 train. NYNH upgrades Baltimore instead of Philadelphia. Unclear what the story is there. And this is going to mean that the B&O is able to upgrade Philly. So that's a big mistake, I think. Runs for 180 and is withholding. The B&O immediately upgrades Philly. And interestingly, elects to upgrade Philly so that it hits the DIT. There is definitely a valid upgrade here where you can upgrade and run directly into New York, bypass this DIT, and that's going to be strictly better for anybody that's not running a D train. So if we look at the B&O player, he's already got a 5 train. Unlikely that he's going to be running a D in the B&O. Probably should have picked the other upgrade just directly into New York. But what do you know? He's going to drop a token. Sorry, I was jumping the gun. He's going to do that later and has a really nice run. PRR immediately upgrades to get into this track, and I believe they drop the token. Yes, okay. So this cuts the B&O's run. Good news for the PRR and bad news for the NYNH. Runs for 180, pays it out. Erie, second operation, just running for 90, pays it out. C&O links up with the East, not very consequential, running for 220, which he's paying. NYC, not entirely clear where he's heading. You probably don't want to pay $120 for Scranton here. I guess in theory, if you lay and upgrade Scranton, you could get into New York that way, but that's a pretty long-term play. B&M, is he going to buy the last 5 here? Looks like he does. So we're facing 6s, and if we just look at the game state here, everybody with a 3 train has some other train, so nobody's going to be forced to e-buy a 6 if someone brings out the 6. And everybody's pretty poor, so there's going to have to be some train shuffling in order to make it happen, and probably withholding. Player most likely to do it is probably A. Murphy, because he's got $300 and can shuffle trains to combine cash. Could potentially see River Fiend do it, but the other 2 players are actually incapable of bringing out the 6 until the CPR floats. So that may be what we see, the CPR float. Last operation here, NYNH is withholding, getting pretty close to permanent train money, and we're into stock round 5. We will see the CPR float pretty early, or at least par pretty early in this stock round, and I think this is a move to try and bring out the 6. We also will be seeing a dump here where A. Murphy is going to sell down the NYC on River Fiend. River Fiend, of course, had the opportunity to prevent this, but probably didn't really see it coming. It's not really that great of a move. NYC has a 4 train. Doesn't have great track, I wouldn't say, but it has $250 in the treasury. So if someone wants to give me a bunch of cheap orange shares with a company that's probably not going to rust before it can withhold, I don't know that that's such a terrible deal. Rest of the stock round is pretty much just the CPR floating, so we're going to skip ahead here and get into the operating round. We were watching the token situation and track situation around Philadelphia, and in this operating round, it gets a little bit funny. B&O immediately upgrades into Philadelphia and drops the token, which kills basically everybody's runs into New York. So the players basically all kind of attacked each other, and now nobody gets to enjoy the nice runs into New York. Runs for 310 and pays it out. PRR, half the shares in the market. So Devouring is living pretty large on the PRR. It's got good runs, good revenue, and he owns 100% of that revenue. So pretty surprising that nobody was interested in these market shares. He's going to run for 330, and he can pay that out, and half that's going into his company. So that's really strong for him. CPR's first operation, he's not laying any track, and he's going to be buying the 6. So we do see that, and that's going to open up some train room for some of these players to start shuffling and hopefully bringing out a D in a 6 train. Pittsburgh gets upgraded. Erie. Erie is upgrading through Albany. Not entirely sure where he's trying to go, but I will point out that A. Murphy has money for a token. He dropped the NYC on Riverfiend, so Riverfiend's probably not super happy with A. Murphy right now. And A. Murphy's runs are all dependent on Rochester. So may want to look at Rochester here to make sure you don't get tokened out. But he's going to sit on cash. He's actually withholding despite having a permanent train and really not having train liability. B&M upgrading, but pretty much already blocked west of Albany. Runs for 180. NYNH, ton of cash in this company. Must have shuffled trains somewhere. And he's withholding again, so we'll snag a 6, it looks like. Now we're just facing D's. And this is what I was talking about. Erie, reliant on Rochester here. Neglected to token it, and then immediately gets tokened out. So now Erie's in a world of hurt. They blocked themselves from running into the double O here, and now they just are stuck running to Rochester until they can upgrade past it, which is going to take a while. So maybe not the best short-term play there. NYC is also withholding, staying brown, and is eking its way towards permanent train money. B&O is operating and really should probably be looking towards this Pittsburgh track. Now that all these tokens have been dropped over here, the only good runs are going to be laying to the west and potentially north up into these double O's. So Pittsburgh is going to be a pretty crucial track for anybody trying to run bigger trains. But for now is not going to be tokening that. PRR, he is upgrading Pittsburgh, but also will not be tokening it. And actually is going to drop his token on New York. So reasonable to take that over Pittsburgh. It does secure him runs into Boston. Definitely understand why you would choose that over Pittsburgh. And again, with 5 shares in the market, is basically just inching his way towards permanent train money without having to suffer the indignities of withholding. CNO heading up to the double O's. Also a player that could be tokening Pittsburgh and not doing it. CPR, just suitcasing. B&M, probably regretting that Providence token at this point. Erie, upgrades Dunkirk and Buffalo. So will be getting himself potentially a run into Pittsburgh through Erie, and will be yet another company. Now we have 3 of them with tokens and with money that is going to neglect to token in Pittsburgh, it looks like. Well, maybe that was too far in advance, but I think we're going to see that in the future. Withholding, N1NH, 2 trains, going to have pretty monstrous revenue, which is nice, but as still withholding because Riverfiend has a lot of train liability coming down the pike here. NYC, pretty poor runs still, really needs to find a way to get into some of these double O's to the west. Running for 120, withholds. And Riverfiend, by withholding on the NYNH and the NYC, has put himself really in a position to get the first D train. So he's going to get the leap on King Zombie and potentially put him in a little bit of a hard position if this D-Train upgrade comes to pass. King Zombie probably could make it happen first with a withhold here, shuffle money. The only problem is that if he shuffles money, he's not going to be able to run that 4, so he'll probably be a little bit short of the D train. But he could potentially just go into his own personal cash and neglect the upgrade by shuffling trains. So he'd probably have about $700 and have to out of pocket $400 for that. Mm, might not be the best move going into the stock round since he's going to want to be buying shares. Regardless, River Fiend is in a pretty strong position for a D train, so has averted a cash crisis. Pittsburgh still not being tokened here, and it looks like the B&O paid out, so he's not worried about the impending rusting event for his other company. PRR has a ton of cash and links up to the 00 and is running for something absurd, 420, yeah, which is pretty darn good considering he gets 100% of that. CNO, he is continuing to work on the 00s, but nobody's interested in dropping any tokens. So you got 2 tokens here. Drop one of them here at least, so that you're not going to be tokened out of the 00s. I don't know. A lot of players with a lot of tokens not using them, and it's painful for me to watch. B&M, he's pretty much done for the game with this company, just running for his 5 train for the rest of the game. CPR is giving himself track, and I think that's probably because he realizes that he's got enough money in the PRR that he's going to be pretty easily affording all the trains he wants. So might as well start running the company if he got 60% of it. So he buys a 4 train out of the PRR, and he actually has to go into his presidency for that. And he now has D train money, at least upgrade money, in the PRR. So he's going to be able to run 2 trains out of the PRR if he wants. Or sorry, he won't be able to do that right now because the CPR is still going to need a train. We see a link up in Erie, so he has a better run now, but is also not going to be protecting his run with any tokens. NYNH, we'll see if he goes for the D train. No reason really not to. So he pays out, and we see the 4 trains rust. Last run, NYC, starting to head over to the 00s, but he's going to be preempted by all these other players since there's so many more track points. He's not going to be able to compete against that. NYC still withholding, doesn't need really money at this point for trains, but I suppose he's looking for token money, which is reasonable. I've been talking about it ad nauseum. All these companies not dropping tokens. Looks like this player might actually be motivated to do it. It is painful to have to withhold. Stock round 6, basically we just see King Zombie build up a massive share lead here. I don't think we need to get into the weeds too much. We'll skip to that and just look, and King Zombie's 5 shares ahead of everyone, but he is unfortunately already over his cert limit because the shares he bought floated up. So this is kind of a transitory share lead, and I will point out that the B&O is operating pretty early, or sorry, I think it's the CNO is operating pretty early in operating order. So he is unfortunately going to need to sell shares early before most of them are able to pay him in order to afford his D train in the CNO. PRR has $800, which is not going to be enough for a D train right now because the 4 trains have already rusted. But with a withhold, he's probably going to be pretty close to just buying it with that. So he runs for 270 and he pays it out. Not too concerned about the D train, it doesn't look like. We'll want that eventually, I'm sure. You can't just sit on $800. It's too costly to accumulate that money and then not use it. B&O, he is looking to get into Chicago later in the game. Runs for 250, pays it out. CNO, he is also laying towards the west, and now we see King Zombie's actually not yet. So I think in the next operating round we'll see that share lead drop a little bit. He's shuffling trains for now. B&M, nothing going on. Erie, looking finally to bypass Rochester. It's been a while before he can get there. And he is still not tokening Pittsburgh. His run would definitely be better if he tokened Pittsburgh, because then he could run up into these double O's. Right now, he has to run into Pittsburgh, which means he can't run back out of it. Um, so even for a short-term revenue gain, it makes sense to token at Pittsburgh. I don't know why nobody's doing it. CPR gave himself a run so that he could force buy a train, but now is going to have to actually live with the fact that the CPR's revenue is pretty poor. So he shuffles a train out of the B&M, and we will see him buying a permanent train shortly, I'm sure. NYNH running a D. He's got a really good run right now. Someone needs to cut that. NYC, he is blocking the Erie from getting into Albany, and he runs for 300, which he pays. Devouring Trey earlier shuffled trains in the CPR, and now is, I think, going to out of pocket a D train for his PRR, which has pretty excellent runs through New York up into those double O's, and looks like he's counting on that. Unfortunately, we may see those runs cut. B&O, this was shuffled earlier so that the King Zombie player didn't have to sell as many shares. He is upgrading Toledo. That's cash that he's probably looking to spend right now for a permanent train. And he does have to sell one of his own B&O shares, a company that's going to be running a D train, no less, because he paid money for that Toledo track and is still, I believe, sitting on a token in the B&O. Yes, that really should be laid here to secure his runs. C&O, he's going to be continuing to run through Toledo, runs his 5 train, pays it out. B&M, he, I believe, I don't know how he got that money. Did he shuffle trains maybe? I think he did. So now he was able to get a run into Albany, which is pretty nice for his run. He's running for 240, increase of $50 from last time. Erie, he, despite the NYC trying to block him, he's able to get into Albany. And does he token that immediately? No. So now that he's into Albany, he finally tokens in Pittsburgh. So someone is finally listening and trying to protect their runs. He is able to run for a little bit more now, and he actually withholds, which is interesting. I don't know what he needs that money for. CPR running a 5 train, pretty poor run, and is going to withhold. Presumably this is so he can lay himself track for a little bit better run in the future. Also just helpful to stay yellow. NYNH should still have a pretty monstrous run. 400, very good, pays it out. NYC running a 6 train. And we finally see Pittsburgh tokened out. I've been talking about this for what, 6 ORs? Finally see it. So this is bad news for the B&O and the PRR, who have been, saving up and shuffling trains for D trains, and now have had their run cut. It's going to be a difference of, at least $100. They're losing out on these double O's. They're losing out on access to Chicago. And I excuse the PRR because they made the conscious decision of tokening New York, but it's pretty inexcusable for these other players not to have tokened Pittsburgh earlier. This was, a very key choke point on the map that was pretty apparent. PRR is operating. Probably a little bit sad to lose access through Pittsburgh, but still running for 340, not big deal. B&O, new D train running for just 190. Who saw that coming? Me. C&O, his other company, and this is another company that he needed to run through Pittsburgh that also had tokens and token money, is now just running for 150, pretty poor. So if we look at the spreadsheet here, in terms of net worth, it looks like Devouring and King Zombie are 1 and 2, and King Zombie is going to be falling behind now because his runs have been cut. So if we're talking about key moments in a game, this Pittsburgh decision is pretty crucial. C&O pays it out. B&M has better runs and runs for 270. Erie looking to, I guess, link up with Baltimore. Not entirely sure. Does have a ton of cash, so presumably is not afraid to lay these $120 tiles if he needs it. Running for 240, pays it out. NYNH. Run was cut by the Pittsburgh track, but still probably pretty happy with the status quo, running for 340. CPR going to probably withhold again. Does. Now has the $80 needed for better track in the future. NYC. He's happy that he has that Pittsburgh token, but unfortunately he doesn't have a D train. So he's going to run for 300, but could probably run for a little bit more if he'd had a better train. He's withholding, so maybe he sees that and says, well, it's going to go late. I may as well try and get a D train. We'll see. Stock round 7, we're not going to talk about much. I'll just point out that King Zombie has to sell a bunch of shares because he's over the share limit, whereas his closest competitor, Devouring Trey, is 4 shares under his share limit. So we're going to see kind of a reversal of this share situation. And even though Devouring Trey is, trailing by 600 bucks, he's going to start making a comeback here. So we'll skip the stock round, just look at the spreadsheet here, and we see that Devouring Trade now has more shares than King Zombie. And King Zombie, even though he had to sell down, is still, once again, over his cert limit. So that's going to come down to what presidencies you have, and if you're able to control staying yellow versus having to invest in other people's companies. It's not King Zombie's fault, but it is a key differentiator between the two positions of these two players. SR7, some things happen. I think basically the theme at this point is that players are starting to realize that they got great trains but terrible runs. So they start laying very expensive track to open up kind of less common track patterns. And basically, we're going to see Pittsburgh bypassed eventually. So after I harped on Pittsburgh's importance for a long time, we're going to see it bypassed. However, I will say I still think that this is a key differentiator in this game because it's cut people's runs for enough ORs that it's made a big difference in their net worth. And then they've had to withhold and lose revenue in other ways in order to lay expensive track to bypass it. So even though it eventually gets bypassed, I still do not want to undersell its importance in the development of this game. So I don't think we need to really watch these ORs very much. We can just skip them and just watch as the track develops. This is pretty important here because this allows the B&O to run its D train around Pittsburgh and also opens up runs for the C&O, of course. We also see the CPR link up for better runs, and the C&O somehow gets some tokens over here, but the problem with this strategy, other than it taking so long, is that by opening these bypasses, even if you drop tokens, the other companies are still able to run these bypasses a lot of the time. So the tokens become less important, not just for your opponent who you're bypassing, but also for you when you're trying to cut their routes. So we will just continue to move pretty quickly. We see the track developing here, but if we look at the spreadsheet, King Zombie has gone for kind of the ultra late game strategy. In the last operating round of 7, he went back and force bought another permanent train into the B&O, it looks like, and now is going to be working on running 2 trains out of the B&O, hoping that that revenue is enough to basically pay for the train and make up for the deficit. So if we look at the spreadsheet here, it looks like he lost basically $500, whereas Devouring gained $500 for a net gain of $1,000 on his closest competitor. And I think that if we think back, King Zombie was up by, I want to say, $600 at the start of those OR7, and now he's down by $800. So that's a pretty big swing. And more importantly, he's still over his cert limit. So he's going to have to sell shares. Devouring is under his cert limit, so he can buy shares, and this share differential is only going to get worse. So the map is open for everyone. Everybody's running D trains, and King Zombie is basically gambled here that the expense of the D train is going to pay off and allow him to overtake Devouring. We can basically just buzz to the end of the stock round here. There's not a whole lot of activity that can occur because all the shares are purchased, but we will note that King Zombie is going to have to sell here. So if we look at the spreadsheet again, King Zombie is even further behind Devouring in terms of share density. So the last set of operating rounds, we basically just have to pay attention to whether or not King Zombie's revenue on the B&O is going to be high enough for him to come back. Devouring's running for 280 on the PRR, which, to be frank, is not the best revenue for a D train. And King Zombie is running for 460. So he's running for not even double. He's got two trains to Devouring's 1, and it cost him massive amounts of money to buy it. We're not going to see King Zombie win it. He's too far behind, even with this late game ploy of multiple trains in the B&O. So we can confirm our suspicions if we just look at the spreadsheet, and we can see that Devouring's running for 910, King Zombie's running for 940. $30 revenue is not going to make up a $900 deficit. And just confirming, market's only 1600. We will see the bank break here, so we can be confident that Devouring has won this game. And I think I harped on this adequately, but I do think track development was very crucial in the outcome for this game. So PRR was able to secure himself pretty good routes by tokening in New York and then having Pittsburgh be open. The other players were kind of asleep at the wheel, really didn't value Pittsburgh or defend their routes, and that allowed Devouring to kind of just walk away with this one. Those minor critiques aside, it was a fun one to watch. So we will jump into the standings. And at the end of week 3, we see that we have some new players at the top of the leaderboard. Actually, Devouring and DAK, the two winners of these two games, have leaped to the top with 11 points each. MP Coin wasn't able to play this week, so got 0 points, which is going to knock him into second, or I guess technically third place. And then we have the rest of the players bringing up the rest of the pack. Hopefully we'll have a little more participation next week, more than 2 games. That'd be great. And I look forward to bringing the commentary next week. Thanks for watching.